I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the Delphi murders, a crime that broke the hearts of a community that turned into an investigation cloaked in secrecy and then turned into a trial with limited public access. And as all this plays out, many are wondering if the truth will be revealed. Here's the story. It was a mystery that broke the hearts of two families, terrified a small community, and touched the world. The murders of two young girls, Abby Williams and Libby German. The case became known as the Delphi murders. The setting, a small Indiana town of just 3,000 people. From the beginning, investigators suspected it was someone local, which made it even more difficult for everyone living in this small community. It all started on February 13th, 2017, when Libby and Abby went hiking. The two teenagers were good friends and had the day off from school. The weather was unseasonably warm, but when Libby and Abby did not show up when they were supposed to get picked up, their families began to worry and they began to search. Then the next day, the bodies of these two girls were found, both victims of murder. Then over the course of the next 5+ years, there were no answers, no arrests, just a series of disjointed clues, like two sketches that looked nothing alike, a video of a suspected killer, and a short audio recording of his voice. Then finally, 5 years after the murders, an arrest. Richard Allen, a man who worked at the local CVS, was charged. Someone who was not on anyone's radar, but someone who admitted to being at the bridge that day. Allen says he's innocent, and his lawyers have been battling with the judge to try to present evidence of who they say is actually responsible. Cameras have been banned by the judge, and now the public waits to see if the truth will come out inside of a courtroom. This case, the murder, the investigation, the trial, everything has been a little bit unusual. I want to go back in time, though, to the day after the girls were found. And this is a brutal, brutal scene, but here's the information that was revealed by the Indiana State Police who were leading up this investigation.
Basically, we have identified the bodies of the two females that were found out yesterday. The bodies have been positively identified as Abigail J. Williams, 13, of the Delphi area, and Liberty Rose Lynn German, 14, of the Delphi area. The two girls were reported missing on Monday, February 13th. The bodies were discovered about 12:15 on the 14th in the woods just east of town here by volunteers that helped in the search of the children after they were reported missing to the Carroll County Sheriff's Department. Family has been notified. This is considered a double homicide investigation. No further information will be released at this time.
And that time, again, is 2017, and it became a murder mystery for 5 years. It wasn't solved. But the other part of it was the investigation, the evidence, everything was kept secret, was kept private, was kept away from the public. And there's reasons why investigators do that, but there's also reasons why some things do get revealed at a certain point. Then they arrest Richard Allen, and still, we know very, very little. And then we find out this, which is 6 years after the murders. We finally get a little more information from the state court documents that were filed in June of 2023. Autopsies of the girls ruled their deaths as homicides, and their wounds were caused by a sharp object. That was it. That was it. Like I said, unlike most cases that we cover here on Court TV around the nation, in all states, we're in Indiana for this one. So this secrecy, this lack of transparency and information brings me to our first question, which is extremely important in a murder case, which is how were Abby and Libby murdered? What are the details of what happened to these two young, innocent girls? Joining me, Court TV senior producer Barbara McDonald, and retired medical examiner and forensic pathologist Dr. Michelle Dupree. Thank you both. Barbara, I want to begin here and take a look at what has come out, what we've learned about Abigail Williams. One gaping wound on the neck, approximately 1 inch deep, likely cut right to left. Markings on the face consistent with some type of restraint on the lower face underneath the mouth. This is information that, to me, very new, that we're learning and beginning to paint a more precise picture of what happened to Abigail here.
Yeah, we got that information when the forensic pathologist testified, and that's Dr. Roland Kaur. He described the one injury to Abby. Libby had more injuries, but he also described that after these injuries were inflicted, that it would have taken 5 to 10 minutes, perhaps longer, for them to become unconscious and then to pass away. Also on the stand, he talked about a murder weapon. He, for many years in his report, said that he didn't know what sort of weapon was used, just that it was a sharp object. But he testified in court that he now believes, in the last couple of months, he's come to believe that it might have been a box cutter that was used. And he said he figured that out because of some markings on Libby's neck that looked like they were caused by a serrated blade, and that he was working in his own shop at his home one day and saw a box cutter and said, that looks like what could have caused these wounds, or at least the one wound to Libby. On cross-examination, though, he did admit that that was purely speculation on his part, and he doesn't have any hard evidence that that was, in fact, the weapon.
Dr. Dupree, 1 inch deep, cut right to left. What does that tell you?
Well, that tells you that whoever did this was probably right-handed, because that is the way that a typical person would do that. They would cut from right to left.
The markings on the face consistent with some type of restraint on the lower face under the mouth. I'm trying to understand that.
Yeah, it was a very faint marking that he said was more visible in the photographs that he took at autopsy and not as visible on the body. He described it as being below the mouth, so not preventing her from being able to breathe, if that was in fact a restraint that was on her during this attack. But he couldn't explain what caused it, other than to refer to it as some sort of a restraint.
So Dr. Dupree, how can someone make that determination?
Well, sometimes it's very difficult, but if there is some kind of bruising or some kind of redness or something like that, it may be if he held her throat or held her chin and then sliced her throat, that could be what caused that. And it would cause a very subtle injury.
Now, looking at what happened to Libby, 3 to 5 wounds on her neck. 2 injuries look like they had a second pass. Blood on hands indicates Libby tried to put pressure on the wounds to stop the bleeding. And again, as Barbara's reporting, believes a box cutter caused the serrated marks on Libby's leftmost wound. Let's start there, Dr. Dupree, with the box cutter theory. What are your thoughts there?
Well, it's certainly possible. It appears that what he is describing is a very thin blade, perhaps serrated, and there are many, many types of box cutters or utility knives that would have a serrated edge on that. So it's very likely that could be what caused it.
Now, another part is the autopsy, more of the autopsy findings. It's performed on the morning of February 15th, but they can't determine the exact time of death. The girls likely died somewhere around 41 hours before the autopsy. Rape kits were performed, no signs of sexual trauma. And Barbara, again, to me, this is a big part of this, right? Girls may have been alive for 5 to 10 minutes after the infliction of the wounds. Putting these pieces together with everything else that you know about this case, Barbara, what are you taking away from what we learned from the forensic pathologist?
One of the things that I wondered as he talked about that 5 to 10 minute window where the girls, he described that Abby certainly would have been able to breathe, that she could have been able to cry or speak, and that they could have moved. And we've heard a lot of the defense theory that this scene was staged and that these girls were positioned. And as the forensic pathologist testified, I kind of wondered if during that time the girls perhaps moved themselves into the positions that they were ultimately found in.
Dr. Dupree, 5 to 10 minutes after the wounds, they're surviving. How much suffering, how much pain, how cognizant are they of what is happening in the moment?
Well, they would certainly have a lot of emotions. They would be scared. They would be absolutely terrified. They would be in pain. They would be bleeding basically out. They wouldn't probably be conscious for the whole 5 to 10 minutes because they would pass out from the lack of blood. However, it would be a very painful death.
This is difficult. Barbara, any reaction from the family to all of these new details being revealed?
I wasn't able, where they have the media sitting in the front row of the courtroom, so I wasn't able during much of that testimony to look back at the reaction. But throughout these days in court, we have seen a lot of very emotional reactions from these families. You can tell that they're crying during breaks, during testimony, that it is very, very difficult. It's difficult for everyone to listen to many of these details and see these photos of the crime scene and the autopsy. They're very graphic, as you might imagine. And so I think everyone in the courtroom is really struggling with these materials. The judge even at one point commented to the prosecutor that she appreciated their efforts to sanitize the images that were shown to the jury as much as possible. Jurors are also having a very difficult time looking at this material. I do notice that they are looking a lot over in the direction of the victims' families as much of this testimony has played out.
Okay. It is, I mean, it's heartbreaking. Our guests are staying with us. Coming up next, this is, I think, an important question in all of this, with the crime scene and what we're learning. Was this a sex crime?
Steer Creek, the Monon High Bridge is over that way. And over here is where the bodies were.
Sarah Boone is charged with second-degree murder after her boyfriend suffocated inside of a suitcase.
He's in the suitcase still. There are multiple domestic violence incidents.
You two hitting each other.
Sarah. That's my name. Don't wear it up.
He's telling you, Sarah, I can't breathe.
George Torres locked inside of a suitcase, begging for help.
I thought he was okay.
The Suitcase Murder Trial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8/7 Central on Court TV.
I'm going to give you guys just a little taste of what the ground is like here. So there's the creek, which Ron says because of drought is very low right now, much lower than it was at the time of the crime. But even to come up here, this is pretty steep, slippery. The ground is soft. There's a lot of leaves down to trees. And it is not an easy walk. And then you could over to this area where it's flat. This is where they were found.
That's Barbara McDonald on the scene, at the crime scene, on the property where Abby and Libby were found, but also the creek. Very important because evidence is found in the creek, and according to prosecutors, the girls and the killer had to cross that creek to get to where they were. Now, let's talk about the two victims here. Again, young girls, and how they were found, what they were wearing. We begin with Abby. Abigail Williams is found in a sweatshirt, but it was Libby's sweatshirt, not her own sweatshirt. She was wearing Libby's sweatshirt. She's wearing 2 bras. She's wearing Libby's jeans, and she's wearing a tank top. Strange, right? So her clothes are off, and she's got Libby's clothes on. In the meantime, Libby is found wearing nothing. She's nude. Abby's wearing Libby's clothes, and Libby is found nude. Strange, more strange facts with all of this. Like, what does that mean? Brings me to my next question. Was this a sex crime? Was this a sex crime? And don't forget what we learned in the autopsy. There was no sign of trauma or sexual assault. Still with me, Barbara McDonald and Dr. Michelle Dupree. Barbara, let's talk more about the way the girls were found and where they were found. Because to answer this question about whether or not this is a sex crime, I think that's all very relevant about what is found where. And the clothes that are missing, I guess, are found in the creek, right?
Yes, about 30 or 40 feet away from where Abby and Libby were found. And they weren't all found in the same exact area. There was 3 different areas in the creek where that clothing was found, maybe 10 feet between each of those groupings. Some of the clothing was completely submerged at the bottom of the creek, and then other clothing was sort of caught up on tree limb debris that was in the creek that made it visible from the surface of the water.
Dr. Michelle Dupree, I'm trying to understand this, what happened here, right? The scene. And from your perspective, listening to some of this evidence, was this a sex crime?
Actually, it sounds like it could be. We know that there was some undressing and redressing, and we often find that when there is an element of sex involved. It doesn't mean that, of course, that there was any sex that took place. He may not have been able to perform. There's all kinds of other things that this could have been. But it sounds like a sex crime to me.
You know, Barbara McDonald, this gets right into motive, the motive area, right? Like, why did this killer, and if it's Richard Allen, why did Richard Allen abduct these 2 girls? What was his motivation behind it? Was it sexual in nature? Have prosecutors alluded to that?
Yes, in his opening statement, prosecutor Nicholas McClellan said that the state believes that Richard Allen abducted these 2 girls and marched them down that hill so that he could, quote, have his way with them, but was interrupted, and then he marched them across the creek where he ultimately killed them.
So, Dr. Dupree, can there be molestation or sexual assault without leaving behind evidence of that?
Well, of course, we always hope that there is evidence left behind, but certainly there can be. He could have even tried sexual acts post-mortem. And that's not out of the realm of possibility. So there should be some evidence. It doesn't necessarily mean that we would find trauma. It just depends on, what he did in the sex act.
So, Barbara, can you remind us of how the girls were when they were found in terms of positioning and such, and how that could potentially illuminate the situation of what motivated this killing?
Yeah, we also do know, Vinny, that sexual assault kits were done at autopsy. We have not heard yet whether any analysis is back on that and what that might reveal, if anything. But the girls were found in this sort of floodplain area of land that was owned by Ron Logan on the north side of Deer Creek. They were abducted from the bridge on the south side of that creek. And marched about a quarter of a mile to where they ended up. Libby, as you mentioned earlier, or rather Abby was fully clothed in Libby's clothing, which was wet. She also was wearing her Converse sneakers. They were also wet, but when those were taken off of her feet and photographed, the bottom of her feet, there was dirt and debris from the creek and from the ground on her feet. So it certainly indicates that at some point during this encounter, her shoes were off and then put back on. I also noticed you could only see one of her shoes in the photographs that were shown in court. And in that photograph, her shoe appears to be untied with the tongue pulled out of it, as if you were prepping it to be taken off or put back on a foot. The other shoe was sort of under her leg, and I couldn't tell if that one was tied or what condition that one was in. And then Libby was near her. Their feet were closer together than their heads were, but they were still a couple of, maybe 2 feet apart where their feet were.
And, we're out of time for now. We're out of time for now. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues. I'm Vinnie Politan. As we continue our investigation of the Delphi murders, 2 young girls are dead. A small community is changed forever, and some are wondering if the right man has actually been charged. Here's the story.
Teenagers Abby Williams and Libby German were best friends, living in the small rural community of Delphi, Indiana. On February 13th, 2017, the girls had a day off from school, so they decided to go on an outdoor adventure. They were dropped off near the Monon High Bridge, and while on that bridge, Libby recorded a man with her phone, uttering the words, "Down the hill." It was down the hill where Libby and Abby would be murdered. Prosecutors say the man on the bridge is responsible, and that man is Richard Allen. But Allen and his attorneys say prosecutors have it all wrong. They say Allen is innocent, and it was someone else on the bridge that day who took the lives of these 2 innocent girls. What is the truth? And will Abby and Libby get justice?
A big part of this story, I mean, a huge part of this story for part of the 5 years was we're looking for a guy and there's video of the killer. Think about that for a second, right? There's an actual video of the killer and they're searching for 5 years for who this man is. So I'm going to show you the video, and not only is there video, but there's also an audio recording of him speaking. So we've kind of put the 2 together here, and you can see the video that was released by police and hear the audio that was released as well. That's just a piece of the video. It's longer than that. That's just the piece that they released. They kept the rest of it to themselves to use at trial. So that brings me to my next question, which is, what does the video reveal? They say that's the killer. What does it reveal? Joining me, Court TV senior producer Barbara McDonald's been covering the story since the beginning, and criminal defense attorney Bob Mata inside that courtroom. Both have been inside the courtroom, obviously. Okay, let's talk about the video, Barbara. I want to put this up on the screen. Recorded February 13th, 2017, 2:13 on an iPhone 6S. Libby is heard saying, there's no path. The trail ends here. We have to go down there. Then the man, the bridge man, the killer, says, guys. Abby says, hi. Man says, down the hill. Is it clear that that's what's happening on this video?
It wasn't super clear to everyone. That was the consensus of the media, is that Abby says hi after he says guys. The prosecutor had laid out in their search warrant or probable cause affidavit on Richard Allen that the man, or that Abby rather, says the word gun in that video. No one who was in court as that video played heard the word gun. They thought that it sounded like Abby said hi, but they also played an unenhanced and then the enhanced version. The entire video is 43 seconds long, and I think it's certainly up for debate what exactly the words are that are spoken in that video.
Bob Mott, a 43-second video. What does it reveal?
Well, initially when they showed it and the way that it went down is they showed the unadulterated, unenhanced video first. And my instinct, and unfortunately I can't have my watch in because I have an Apple Watch, so I couldn't time it. But the feeling of it is that I looked to my seat neighbor and I said, was that 43 seconds? Because it didn't seem like 43 seconds. And when I'm initially looking at it the first time, and they only played it one time, I don't see the man behind Abby. I'm like, where was the guy? And the person next to me is like, well, I think I saw the guy. So then when they put the next witness on, who was the witness that did the enhancement, they played it again. So we got to see it a second time, and I was diligently looking for the guy. So I see the guy, and he's way back there, okay? And he's clearly still on the bridge. All right, now you've heard enough about this bridge, Vinny. At this point, there is no walking across this bridge without looking down to see where you're going. It is not possible. You will fall to your death.
Right. Bob, we're taking a look at it right now so people understand the Monon High Bridge. This is a bridge I would never go over, but people do, and they did. So explain this to me one more time. The proximity of the man to the girls, and if the girls are recording him. I mean, we've seen this one zoom shot. It looks like he's got a gate to it. I don't know if that's just because the video's looped. So compare what we're looking at now, which is like a zoom in, and it's kind of blurry, right? Of this man versus what was shown and what the whole video actually looks like.
So it's from Libby's POV. Okay, so the first shot we see is Abby probably about, what would you say, Barbara, 10 yards away from Libby, where she's filming, and she's still on the bridge. I'd say 25 to maybe 30 yards beyond her is the guy. So then the focus goes to the ground, and you hear Libby talking. She's saying, oh, here's some gravel. And then she flashes back up momentarily. You see Abby for just a second, who looks like she's kind of jogging because she's reached the end of the bridge. All right, so she's off the bridge. She's still on the tracks, but she's off the bridge. And then she goes back down to the ground, Libby does, with her filming, and says something to the effect that there's no path. This is where we can go down, or there's no path to go down. Maybe Barbara can remember exactly what she says. And then you hear at the very, very end, Vinny, the very last maybe 2 seconds is where you hear what sounds like a male voice. And then that's it. It's over.
And
so that's the whole thing.
When do you see it? Like this video I've been looking at for years, it wasn't so clear. So there might only be this one little clip of him.
Yeah, I think what Bob was indicating, as Libby is holding the phone, she's motioning with that hand. And so she pulls the hand down and you see the ground, and then she pulls her hand back up as she's talking and motioning. And that's when you get to see the man and Abby a little bit more. But it's out of the 43 seconds, he's not in frame for very many of those seconds, and some of the seconds that he would possibly be visible, Abby is between him and Libby, and so blocking the view of the man. So it's really, there's not a lot of information in that video that's particularly helpful about what exactly happened.
Right. We get to see his clothing, though, right? We get to see his clothing, but for the jury that's looking at this, they don't get what we have, right? Which is the looped close-up image of this person. They get the whole thing.
Right. They get to see it once.
And that's it, Bob? Once? They see it once and that's it?
Once. And then when the reconstruction guy or the enhancement guy came on, they played it a second time. So that's all we saw. And what I'm suggesting is, and I'm curious as to what Barb's opinion is on this, and I think we probably talked about it outside of court, how does he make up that distance in that short period of time under the conditions that I talked about initially, which is he has to traverse that bridge.
Wait a minute. Wait, are you saying that it may not be the bridge man whose voice that is?
You cannot see his mouth move.
Wow. So is it possible someone that's on the other side of that bridge, and Barbara, what's on the other side of the bridge? Who would be there? Who would have access to that?
Private property. That's where the private property begins. There are some paths.
Whose private property is that?
It's the Weber property, and I believe at the time it was owned by his parents, but Brad Weber was living there. I believe now it is his property, but it is private property on the south end of that bridge.
Interesting. And so this video that we've been waiting for, like, what was released is much clearer than what was shown. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, that is not what the video looks like. That image, that has been enhanced, and they've zoomed in on it. They've taken those frames of the video and they've enhanced it. So they got as close up, they got it as unblurry as they could get it. And that's what we've been seeing for all these years. It's not what the video looks like at all. I mean, that guy is off in the distance.
And what you're saying
people
is,
have asked, why isn't there more video? And
right,
there's no more of him to show. That's it.
And again, the distance and the time, significant here, because from what you saw, Bob, when you see the whole video, which again has not been made public, the amount of time that it might take for the bridge guy to be close enough to be heard on the video may or may not make sense to you, Bob? Is that what you're saying?
It doesn't. I just don't see, and again, it's hard to gauge distance, right? Because you're looking at him, and he's definitely in the background. But like, Barb, what do you think? Like, what would you estimate how far when we first see him? Because I'm telling you, I did not see him at all the first time that they played the video. The second time, I was diligently only looking.
But when that video begins, he is definitely some distance behind Abby. She seems to be sort of trying to hurry. She's looking down, trying to hurry off of the bridge to get to where Libby is, who's already off the bridge on that south side. But by the time the video is about to end, he definitely seems to have made up that distance. Either he's very familiar with that bridge and had no problem speeding up, or I suppose you could argue that there's another voice from somewhere else, because you don't see that man speaking those words on that video.
This is so different than what I expected. So different than what I expected. Our guests are staying with us. Still to come. Did eyewitnesses see Richard Allen?
Richard Allen, you child murderer! Why did you do it?
One of the most successful true crime TV shows ever.
This is crazy.
Now has a new home on America's original true crime obsession, 48 Hours on Court TV. Coming up next on Court TV.
What happened that night? Are you not prepared to take responsibility for any of your crimes?
Interview with a Killer, a Court TV original series. Sunday, 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
Today is not a day to celebrate, but the arrest of Richard M. Allen of Delphi on 2 counts of murder is sure a major step in leading to the conclusion of this long-term and complex investigation. We are going to continue a very methodical and committed approach to ensure that if any other person had any involvement in these murders in any way, that person or persons will be held accountable.
That's after the arrest of Richard Allen. And by the way, some people believe there are potentially others involved, and there's some that believe Richard Allen's not involved. And then, of course, prosecutors believe he acted alone. So, there were other people there that day. Other people who saw things, which brings me to my next question, which is about the eyewitnesses. Did eyewitnesses see Richard Allen? You know that moment in a courtroom, right? Do you see the person you saw walking across the bridge in court today? Yes, I see them right there, sitting at counsel table, wearing the what is this, purple shirt. Still with me. Barbara McDonald and Bob Mata. Let's go through some of these witnesses. First one, this is a witness who saw someone before the murders. This is Brianne Wilbur, who was, I believe, 16 at the time, saw the bridge guy at the trails walking with a purpose before Abby and Libby arrived. A man dressed in layers caught her attention because it was a warmer day. Man gave her weird vibes. Man was wearing a blue or black jacket. That's what we see there. Blue pants. That's what we see there. He was taller. Brianne was the height of his upper arm. Told law enforcement in 2020 the man she saw was in his 20s. Well, she's 16. I don't know how well she knows ages, but says he was in his 20s. Barbara McDonald, how does that match up?
Well, so far, you know, nobody's been able to say that the person they saw was Richard Allen. And the question that you just asked, Vinnie, about do you see the man in court today, that's not been asked of these witnesses. Another teen witness who was with Brianne Wilbur that day, Rayleigh Voorhees, she testified that the man she saw was taller than she is, and she's 5'7". And the defense attorney, Jennifer Auger, said, so perhaps 5'10"? And she said, yes.
Well, how tall is Richard Allen?
Is about 5'4" to 5'5".
Bob Mata, what are your thoughts here? We'll put up another one of the witnesses here, which is Betsy Blair. Again, this is before the murder. Saw a man on the bridge. He looked like he was expecting someone or something. Said the man she saw was the man in the bridge guy image. Right there, there's bridge guy. That's the guy. Said he was in his 20s to his 50s, had brown poofy hair, and said the man looked young. I'm wondering if she's the one that gave the description of the sketch that looked like Justin Timberlake.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, okay.
She is.
There you go. Bob Mata, I mean, you've tried a lot of cases. Eyewitnesses, in many of these cases, right, they'll point the finger, this is the person I saw. And then the sketch on the right is the Timberlake one I was talking about. What are your thoughts, Bob, about Brianne Wilbur and Betsy Blair?
It's exactly like you said. Eyewitness testimony is typically the most unreliable testimony you can get because every person, when they're in a moment like that, doesn't necessarily know, unless they're seeing a crime being perpetrated at the time, doesn't know they have to commit anything to memory, right? So you're just kind of looking at somebody, you might be like, hey, it looks a little off, you know, but if you don't know that you need to remember what you're seeing, you're going to forget details. Because when Rayleigh Voorhees is testifying, she remembers the guy wearing all black sweatshirt or a black jacket, black jeans, black boots, you know. So like everybody's memory of this guy is completely different than the other ones. Now, Betsy Blair she looks to be in her late 40s, somewhere around in that area. and she was obviously older than the girls that were all still in high school, and even younger out of that group of 4 with Rayleigh and Brianne, who were together with 2 of Rayleigh's sisters. They were all out there. And so we heard 2 of their witness accounts, and they were both very different, even to the extent where Rayleigh says that they see him, in my estimation, on my count, Barbara, it was 45 minutes later than what Brianne said, because she took the picture, which she did have a timestamp, which was put on Snap, and we know that that picture was taken about, I think it was 1:39, I think she said. It might have been 1:29 p.m. And where Rayleigh had them seeing him like after, like at 2:15, like right before they were getting to the Freedom Bridge. So there's a group that's together, but their time is way off as to when they saw them. So, I mean, there's just, it's problematic. It's problematic as to when they saw him.
Absolutely, and they're not saying that's the guy. Like in court, the guy sitting right there, yeah?
No in-court IDs.
Nothing. One more witness I need to get to before we run out of time, Barbara. I'm so sorry. Sarah Carbaugh saw a man walking on 300N covered in mud and blood. Mud all over, blood spatter on the lower pants only. Man's demeanor was sketchy. His head was down, hands in his pockets. Tells police what she saw 3 weeks later. That's a problem. The other stuff sounds pretty good. Barbara, your thoughts about Sarah's testimony?
This was a witness I really wish that we had cameras in court for, because it would be interesting for the public to be able to see her testimony. She came off as very rehearsed, not necessarily rehearsed by the prosecution, but rehearsed perhaps on her own. She got very argumentative with the defense. They pointed out that she was interviewed 3 times by police. She never mentioned the blood in the first 2 interviews. She also didn't even call police until 3 weeks after she saw the man. She says she saw the man covered in mud and blood, goes home, learns Abby and Libby are missing, and then waits 3 weeks to call police because she was feeling anxiety and panicky about what she had seen. On cross-examination, a lot of her testimony really fell apart. She only mentioned the blood in the 3rd interview, but she didn't even mention the mud in that interview. She tried to say that perhaps the police officer didn't write down what she said, or that might have been part of the testimony or part of the recordings that were lost in the early days of the investigation. I think at the end, she perhaps wasn't as credible as the state had hoped she would be.
And she's important, seeing a man walking down 300N, which could be the killer, and if it's Richard Allen, walking back to his car. Big thank you, Barbara McDonald, Bob Motta. We got a lot to do on this story, and we'll continue the coverage, obviously. Abby and Libby were so brave. Getting that video, even if it's just that split second of the killer, so important. They did nothing wrong. They deserve justice. And in our system, justice equals the truth, whatever it is and wherever it leads. So let's hope, despite their lack of transparency, that the truth of what happened to Abby and Libby is revealed in Indiana. Those girls deserve it. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.